Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why seeing a beautiful sunset or a vibrant painting can lift your mood so much? This new research dives into how we learn to see color and what happens when that learning is different. Okay, big picture first. Imagine a baby born with eyes that can't quite see the world clearly, at least not in full color. New research by Vogelsang and their team suggested that because these babies don't get to experience that initial phase of fuzzy color vision, they overcompensate later in life and rely too much on color to understand things. But hold on, our guest researcher David Peterzell has some fascinating thoughts on this. He argues that the developmental story is actually much more interwoven, and it predicts the opposite. So, the original study looked at people who were born blind and then regained vision later in life, a group called the Prakash patients. They found that these individuals, when asked to identify objects, were much better when the objects were in color compared to black and white. Normally sighted people didn't show this big difference. The researchers thought this was because these late-sighted patients missed out on an early stage in normal development where babies' color vision is a bit limited. This supposed early limitation, they theorized, forces normal babies to build their understanding of objects based on shades of light and dark, or luminance. First, this builds a strong base in understanding form so they don't get too reliant on color later. But Peterzell's paper argues that this is where the story gets tricky. Decades of research, he points out, show that the baby's vision isn't just color limited, the clarity of sight. How well they see shapes and their color perception all mature together like a bundled package. Think of it like a car engine. You can't just tune up the color sensors independently. The whole engine, which handles both color and brightness, needs to get stronger. This front-end bottleneck, as scientists call it, means that when a baby's eyes are still developing, everything brightness, shape, and color is a bit fuzzy and less defined at the same time. There isn't a special luminance-only window where the brain perfectly learns objects in black and white before color kicks in. So, Peterzell's big point is that the core idea of Vogelsang et al.'s theory that there is a specific luminance-first learning period for normal babies doesn't seem to hold up based on what we already know about how babies' eyes develop. Beyond the core theory, Peterzell also raises some important questions about how the original study was done. He points out that the group of people studied was quite small and maybe not typical. Then there is the order in which the tests were given. If people saw the black and white images first, they might have gotten better at recognizing the objects just from practicing, making the color images seem even more helpful later. Plus, the computer models used to simulate development were a bit too simple, and the tests for color vision might not have been perfectly fair. Let's dive a bit deeper into this developmental coupling idea. The original research asked why, when we can see color, we're still pretty good at recognizing things even in black and white photos. Their idea was that this robustness comes from babies having limited color vision early on. This forces them to really nail down object recognition using brightness and form. This sounds logical, right? If color is a bit washed out at first, you'd better learn to love shades of gray. But Peterzell pushes back, saying that this color-degraded phase isn't separate. He cites numerous studies that show the very same things that limit color vision in babies, like the development of their eyes' light-sensing cells, called photoreceptors, also limit their ability to see brightness and detail. It's like a single pipeline that's narrow for everyone, affecting all aspects of vision early on. Essentially, the bottleneck doesn't improve for brightness before it improves for color, or vice versa. They both get better at roughly the same pace. This figure really helps visualize it. Imagine 3 lines on a graph, showing how good babies are at seeing color and brightness over time. In normal development, all these lines start low and go up together. For the Prakash patients who gained sight late, Peterzell argues they would have all those senses boosted to adult-like levels at once. Not just color. This means any over-reliance on color from the start might not be because they missed the luminance, focused phase, but because they received the sudden flood of all visual information at once. This table is a deep dive into all the research Peterzell's referencing. It's packed with studies from the late 80s and 90s that all point to this idea of developmental coupling. One study by Banks and Bennett in 1988, for instance, used math to predict how sensitive babies would be to color and brightness, and found that the limitations lined up. Color and brightness vision, they concluded, are yoked together. This implication is key. Any weakness in seeing color can be explained by the weakness in seeing brightness, so there is no special color problem. Another study by Brown and Teller in 1989 found that babies as young as 3 months actually have the building blocks for color vision, suggesting color isn't absent but develops right alongside our ability to see light and dark. And it is not just behavioral studies, even brainwave studies looking at electrical signals called VEPs show that the parts parts of the brain dealing with color and brightness mature at the same rate. It's like a single developmental engine powering both. This is a crucial point. The Prakash patients, when they gain sight, don't just have mature color vision. They likely have all their visual systems maturing at once to adult levels. This is very different from a normal baby who goes through a much slower, gradual development of all these systems together. It's like comparing someone who suddenly gets a fully built house versus someone who builds it brick by brick. So Peterzell's argument is that the observed difference in how the Prakash patients use color might be due to the fact that they skip the slow, gradually impoverished developmental period. Instead of building object recognition on Luminance because color was initially weak, they were deprived of all visual input for a long time. When vision returns, they have a highly developed system suddenly activated. This could lead to a different way of using visual information, but not necessarily because of a missed luminance first phase. It is more about the sudden availability of all these visual inputs at the same time, when the brain might not be fully ready to process them in the usual way. The color preference could be a side effect of this more general disruption of the normal developmental timeline. Peterzell suggests that the original researchers might have focused too much on color as the unique factor, when really the early visual experience involves a whole package deal of limitations, fuzzy images, low contrast, and muted colors, all at once. Now, Peterzell also brings up some important methodological critiques of the original study. He mentions that another team, Wallace and Martin, did a statistical reanalysis and found that the original study's main finding that the late-sighted group relied more on color might not be statistically significant when analyzed more carefully. Basically, the normally sighted people in the study were already so good at identifying objects in color that it was hard to show them getting even better with more color. This made it tough to find a big difference between them and the late-sighted group, making the whole comparison a bit shaky. Then Peterzell points out the order of the tasks. They tested grayscale first, then color. He argues that if participants learned the objects during the grayscale test, they might perform better on the color test just from that prior exposure. This is called an order confound, and it could make the color advantage look bigger than it really is. He also questions how well the control group was matched. The normally sighted people wore glasses to blur their vision to mimic the visually impaired patients. But Peterzell suggests this blurring might not perfectly simulate the actual visual impairments. Specifically, it might affect different types of vision, like seeing fine details versus colors, in different ways. He brings up other studies on people with cataracts, which is a common cause of congenital blindness. These studies often show that while people with cataracts have trouble with brightness and seeing fine details, their ability to see color is often preserved. This suggests that the difference seen in the Prakash patients might be due to a specific weakness in their brightness and detail vision, while color remains relatively strong and not due to a developmental history of experiencing poor color vision. The computer models used in the original study also face criticism. Peterzell explains that these models were trained on a simple switch between seeing only black and white and seeing full color. Real babies, however, experience a much more gradual development of their color vision. They don't just flip a switch from black and white to color. The model simplicity doesn't capture the nuances of real visual development. Another important experimental detail highlighted is that in the original study's color vision test, the colors weren't equiluminant. That means a red circle might have been much brighter than a green or blue circle, or even the gray circle. If someone has good brightness perception, but weaker color perception, they could still guess correctly if the colors have different levels of brightness. This means the test might not have purely measured color vision as intended. So, what is Peterzell's conclusion? Has not saying the original observation that late-sighted people might rely more on color is wrong. It's the explanation for that observation that has questioning. He believes the explanation needs to account for the deep connection between how color brightness and detail vision develop together. The core message is that early visual development isn't about color being weak on its own. It is about a general immaturity across all aspects of vision. This immaturity is coupled, meaning they all develop together. He proposes that the observed color preference in late-sighted individuals might be a result of them missing the entire gradual developmental process, not just the color part. This means their grayscale recognition might be weaker not because they didn't learn luminance first, but because they missed the years of overall limited visual input that helps build a strong foundation for object recognition. Peterzell hints at an alternative explanation. He suggests a developmental scaffolding model. This theory proposes that a basic visual blueprint is laid down before birth. Then, after birth, the limited visual input helps shape how that blueprint is used. especially relying on luminance because it is the most stable signal when everything else is fuzzy. So, the Prakash patients might have the prenatal blueprint, but they skip the crucial prolonged period of limited visual input that normally trains the brain to build from luminance. For future research, Peterzell calls for studies that consider this developmental coupling, use more realistic computer models, and employ better experimental designs, like counterbalancing the order of tasks. He believes answering the big question whether early visual limitations are adaptive or just incidental will require a more nuanced story than just focusing on color alone. Ultimately, Peterzell argues that the original study's central claim that missed neonatal color immaturity drives later color reliances weakened by its failure to account for the coupled nature of visual development, along with several methodological concerns. It is a fascinating look at how intertwined our senses are, and how the story of vision is much more complex than we might initially assume. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations into the human mind.